conversation on branding. Our moderator for that is Sadaf. Hi. A round of applause. Thank you for being here.
It's a pleasure.
Speaker. Over to you.
Wonderful. So, exciting day, guys, isn't it? Hello? Yes? It's great to see a lot of you guys engaged because I don't know if it's hit you guys yet, but it's hit me. We're literally sitting with Uber's leadership team right now. Woo! That's pretty cool, isn't it? That doesn't happen often. So thank you so much for being as accessible as you guys are being, because we literally walked into this room and it's like literally you have to repeat the title to be able to say, okay, this is the marketing head for EMEA, which is a very big region, sitting right here and taking the time out to speak to all of us. Thank you so much, Patrick.
Anytime.
So,
and I've told you you can ask me anything, right?
Literally anything. So we're going with the Ask Me Anything format. So that's what we're working with. But just to kind of get an assessment of the audience, how many of you are directly associated with startups? Great. So pretty much more than half of the audience is there, which is fabulous because, Patrick, marketing is quite a buzzword, isn't it? And everyone talks about marketing, and it's been traditionally defined in a very different way. But what does marketing mean for a startup or a tech startup or just a product that's disrupting the industry, so to speak?
Well, thanks for the question. I want to start by saying welcome and thanks for welcoming us to Pakistan, to Lahore. It's been a wonderful 12 hours and we have a lot more time to indulge, but it's already been extremely welcoming. Thanks also to the previous speaker. Speaking about marketing is pretty easy, but some of the debate we just had I think takes a lot of bravery.
Exactly.
It's not that easy to have that conversation. It's easier to do it on a panel. It's not that easy to have the conversation within businesses. And so I think championing that is important. So thanks for the bravery. Back to the question. Marketing. It's one of those terms, I think if you look at the dictionary in marketing, you'll find 120 definitions. You may find just as many for branding and a number of other terms out there. And that's what I love about it. Like nobody sort of knows what they're doing, or what we do in any case. But on the other hand, it's also one of those things that everybody thinks they know how to do. And it's one of those things because people consume media. Anybody consumes media, and what they see is advertising. And so to many non-marketers, marketing is that. And to anybody that has a creative thought in them, they think that they can be a good marketer. And it's a blessing and a curse. Because as marketers, it makes it really easy for us to connect with people. You can have a conversation with almost anybody in a business, and that's actually how I got into this. So back to the core of the question, what is marketing today? It's a whole lot of different things. I think at its core, it's about demand generation. I think it's about bringing meaning to businesses. There's a lot of things that great businesses do, but I think as marketers, we can add a layer of depth, we can add a layer of meaning. We can also, and should be, the ambassadors of our audience. There's marketing research, there's insights, there's UX. As marketers, as brand managers, and whatever function we have to be those ambassadors. And I think last, but certainly not least, some of the tools we have at our disposal allow us to inspire people. And I think in that we bring organizations together. I think that's the power of marketing. And yes, that results in advertising, marketing research, performance marketing, CRM, all the good things that marketers do as a function. But I think as a discipline, it's much bigger.
Okay, thank you. But just to add to your point, like you said, everyone at least at some point feels that they understand their brand and they can sort of divulge into marketing. But I've often heard conversations where, especially in the startup environment, where they're very small teams functioning, when they get into marketing, it's very, very overwhelming because there's just so many avenues for it. So how does one determine the size of marketing that's right for you and at what time?
And it's not just overwhelming for startups, it's overwhelming for billion-dollar businesses. Because there's always something new, there's something old, and there's something happening that way. Before I became a marketer, I was a brand strategy consultant. I managed an agency called Interbrand in the Benelux, brand consulting and sort of valuation on the one end and creativity on the other. And I work quite a bit with startup companies, and I still do today. And I think one of the core pieces I tell people, forget about marketing for a second. If you're a founder, if you're running a startup, if you're in an early startup phase, forget about marketing for a second. Find your product market fit. And I hope you've already found it, because what are you doing otherwise starting a business? But take a day, if nothing else, by yourself or with your team and put on paper what your brand is going to be about. I'm not asking you to draw a logo. I'm not asking you to provide a campaign. I'm asking you to put on paper what will make you authentic. What is the truth about how you came to that product market fit, that no matter what happens in the world is the story that you're going to be able to tell. How are you going to be differentiated today and in the future? And sometimes that will change because your market conditions will change. But what will differentiate you as a business, as a group of talent with that product market fit? And then execute on that consistently. If there's nothing else you do, focus on those things. And the amount of people that I see that don't take the time to do that, to be honest, Uber probably is one of those examples, and at a very late stage discover that they have grown $1 billion run rate unicorn of a business, and suddenly are faced with a situation where they have to almost pull back to say, oh my God, what's next for us? Because competition's catching up, there's a commoditization in this marketplace. But what is our point of differentiation? What actually makes us authentic? What do we get into this to do? And I think having that filter early on is important. Also, as a founder, I think it enables you to let the business run with it. Right? You don't have to be part of every conversation. There are so many family businesses where the patriarch or the matriarch translates, this is what my grandfather or my grandmother meant when they started the business. But when those people leave the business, that spirit often disappears. And think about a startup in very much the same way. How do you position the brand within your employees, within your staff, so that it doesn't always need you in that conversation? And so that's the core of it. From there, you can then talk about marketing mix, you can talk about investments, you can try things and see what the return on investment is. But that's almost easy once you have that first definition.
Yes, so it all starts with really being aware of what your product or your service really stands for and what it kind of gives to the market.
And the product or service, the brand. Because here's the thing, you are going to have a brand, no matter what happens. People are going to talk about it. You're going to put a product out there and it's going to be perceived in a certain way, and you have a decision to make. You can decide to help people understand what that should be, or you can let them decide completely on their own based on the experiences they have. I would always choose the prior. And if you don't, you choose the latter, you're going to have to spend a lot of money down the road course correcting. Whether it's with consultants or massive ad campaigns to apologize for choices that you've made that are not 100%. So definitely choosing the prior.
So that's a great action item, so to speak, for any startup that's here, because I think often people kind of jump to making the Facebook pages and the Instagram handles and the logos and everything, and everyone's got, sort of, I'm here now, but not really understanding what I'm doing here.
And it's interesting because sometimes they don't even do that themselves. They ask friends, family, sometimes they pay a little amount to create a web page. And even at that point, if you are not able to brief properly, if you're not able to give a web developer or a designer who's a friend a brief that says, look, I have a product and it is a lemon, but I want to sell my lemon in the most emotional way because I have the world's cheapest lemon, or I have a lemon that is always going to be slightly sweeter than the other ones. If you're not able to portray that, they're not going to be able to come back with a proper solution.
But now just leading the conversation to say digital, because I think that's inevitably where once you have that clarity, a startup sort of tends to thrive in the digital environment. And digital's made marketing very, very democratic, hasn't it?
It's made content democratic. I think there was a phase where marketing was, the power mix on marketing was shifting. I'm not sure it's making marketing democratic. Everybody has access to marketing tools, but the players that control it are still 2 or 3, 4, 5 very large parties. We talk Google, Facebook, and a number of others. From a platform perspective. So I think that there was a phase where there's just a lot of sources, a lot of places to go to. But what it's made democratic is as a startup founder, you no longer need a market. You no longer need an agency. You can go direct to source and you can do some of these things yourself. It has, however, made content for you. I think that's interesting.
Exactly. So essentially, you're kind of fighting for the share of mind constantly, even within the digital space, isn't it?
You're always fighting for share of mind. Share of wallet, share of mind, but I always tend to think about share of mind. I think it's a great way. That sense of admiration, that sense of coming to mind first when people make a choice that is within that category. And how do you claim that presence and recognition and differentiation are so key in that. So digital tools are a very scalable way. You can start low scale, you can target in a very narrow space. I think that's the power of really digital. It also allows you to start with smaller investments. Right? The barrier to entry to a television campaign is usually in the millions, depending on the markets that you're in, to do it properly. Whereas you can use digital means to target a neighborhood, to target a very narrow cluster of people. And I think that lends itself to trial and error. I think it also lends itself so that smaller businesses have access to that sooner.
But I do think that one of the biggest dilemmas of startups lately, at least the ones that I've observed, is that either they rush into marketing too quickly or they outsource marketing too quickly. And I think founders of such sort of services or products are always wondering, when is the right time to start marketing?
Right. Well, let me take a little bit of the myth out of that. So I think Uber's a company that we can probably put our hand, you can correct me if I'm wrong here. But Uber's done a lot without ever really investing in marketing. I think the early phases of growth at Uber were because of an unbelievable product market fit, were because of viral growth and investment. And I often speak at conferences and with marketers, and they kind of, oh, but now if you could tell them, they probably learned a lesson and they would do it differently next time around. Well, absolutely not. I actually think that that's perfectly valid. And I think that we are seeing a new reality where great product market fit, the virality of new products and services, quality in delivery can go a very long way in growing a business. I think, though, back to our earlier point, defining before all that happens how you want this thing to shape up in people's minds so that that is consistent in the content that they consume. And I think then starting to invest in marketing in small ways and discovering where you could move even quicker, rather than saying, I'm nowhere and I need to pay to get somewhere, I think is a better place. How can you accelerate growth rather than seed growth? For some startups, it's probably a better way to think about it.
But Patrick, what I'm picking from your conversation is that with regards to especially tech startups or startups for that matter, the product and where it fits or how it serves a certain need is almost as important as how you kind of end up communicating it. Because a lot of times people don't kind of work on that differentiation and they just want to like...
Oh, absolutely. And having said that, I'm very much a marketer who has never in his career taken a decision to put lipstick on a brand or on a product, I would say. And so I feel very strongly that product market fit, having a great product experience is the core, and then marketing can help bring that to audiences. I think if you have to use marketing to make your product or service look better than what it really is, you need to stop that investment. You need to go back and spend that money improving the product or service experience. Now, that's where a great marketer can help, because going back to what we talked about, what is marketing in the first place, marketers are educated to dive deep on what people need, what drives them, what makes them tick, how they behave, how that behavior could change. And that knowledge can often influence the people within the business and founders who are really focused on developing a very specific product.
Okay, great. So obviously startups by definition kind of disrupt the market in a certain way, but you also experience that either existing players or other Me Too products kind of quickly jump the bandwagon at that time. And I think one of the biggest struggles for startups really is to kind of continue building that differentiation.
Yeah, that's what keeps me up at night. So, I mean, let's be honest.
What's the magic formula?
What should we do? Who came here on Uber today? No, that's not very cool. Of the non-Uber people, who came here on Kareem today? So it's pretty balanced, but there are markets where that's not balanced. It's not a startup dilemma. Every business faces phases where you introduce something. There's massive growth there. Investors see that, and money flows into the category as a whole. And if you're not able to differentiate your brand, as well as your product and service, you're going to get into a commoditized space. And specifically in a space that becomes well-funded because the category sees massive growth, which is very much the situation that we're in, and some other categories as well, that becomes very hard. And you're going to spend a lot of your money creating a commoditized category. So again, starting with that thought of no matter what happens, this is what makes us different. And to tell you, and I think you'll know this coming from Coke and other places, sometimes the brand ends up being the differentiator. Sometimes the product starts being the differentiator. Coca-Cola, if you think back, and you're going to correct me if I get this wrong, but it's right, it really did start on the product proposition. It started on great taste, great flavor, refreshing, and now we're into happiness. But we didn't start there. The product had to be positioned, the brand had to be built, and now the brand is the differentiator of choice. And that's a pretty healthy evolution. And that's where brand really helps long-term.
So just to make the conversation a little more actionable for a lot of startups sitting in the audience, and I was just wondering, I mean, if you're a startup in this day and age, how do you I understand that the first and foremost point is just achieving that brand clarity. But then after that, how do you go from that to say, deciding what your marketing mix is going to be, deciding what the investment levels should be? I mean, what are some of the considerations that you should have in mind when you are going on that journey?
Audience first. I think the next step, we can definitely talk about the entire marketing process and briefing and steps that are taken, but I think once you've defined what you want to be for an audience, has to be a part of that conversation, because when you talk about the fourth point that I didn't mention, which is relevance, it's like, all right, you can be differentiating You can be authentic and you can do that consistently, but if you're not relevant to your audience, it's never going to work. You're going to do that for yourself. And your audience's needs change. So I think a marketer should start by saying, as a business, here's 12 audiences we could approach. We're going to choose to do just this one very right for these reasons. From that flows, how do those people behave? How do they move? Where do they live? What type of content do they consume? When, how, and where? And what would be the most relevant place for me to talk to them? And sometimes the answer is I need a television campaign because that's all this audience consumes. And then you need to go find the funds for that. And you go fundraise if you're a startup.
God help you if you come to that conclusion.
But sometimes you find out that these people take a very specific metro line in the city. And so investing on a very targeted bit of out of home might be the best way to target that audience because it's a relevant thing that you're doing that connects to that metro system. Or maybe you find that that specific audience consumes content created by 2 or 3 influencers. And so you start generating content in a scalable way to those influencers. And so I don't think that there's a holy grail in terms of marketing mix. I think the discipline of understanding your audiences and then choosing to activate against those audiences is probably the right question.
I'm loving this because you're like forcing us to think in a lot of the supposedly more non-glamorous aspects of marketing, which is sitting inside a room and writing down that paper to understand your own differentiation, then taking the time to observe your audience. And, I almost see that, when you start up, you instinctively want to just jump and kind of put yourself out there to the world, but that's clearly not the way to go.
It's not. And trust me, some of these things, strategy is never dull, but I think if you are a founder, you like to move quickly, and sometimes I think taking a day or two to understand things, map them out, build the future for yourself, and build a foundation that you could trust your teams to deliver on, even if it's just for the next 12 months, and then reassess funding is a great thing. I started today in 2 focus groups for 2 reasons. One, because when I visit markets, I think it's a great opportunity for me to understand a little bit more of the context. But secondly, because that's what we should do as marketers. We should listen to our audiences talk about our products and services, talk about how they live, how they breathe, how they move around the city, what they like, what they don't like. Don't ever underestimate the learnings that you get. No matter how much digital data you might be able to get from the product and service, hearing people talk about the product is always an insight.
So for literally every market, there's a bit of learning and a bit of unlearning that you have to go through to be able to pick that up. But speaking to one of your earlier points, and you had spoken about content and how content is sort of making the playing field much more democratic. And we've had some great examples locally when suddenly a local startup gets noticed because they put out a very creative post or contextually relevant post and everything. So in your experience, how much focus should be going on just kind of understanding your audience and developing content that works for them as opposed to, just say jumping the gun to investing in money, media money, so to speak?
Well, you need content to put into the media, so it kind of comes first anyways. Google a couple of years ago introduced a model that I still use, not because it is the world's best model, but because it's super simple. And sometimes the best models are super simple. So it's kind of hub, hero, hygiene. Or the other way around, kind of hero content, that would be kind of your advertising campaign. If you have money to invest in that, your hub content, that's content that you create that's used across multiple media, and your hygiene stuff. If you're sending emails to your audiences, it's never going to be just text. You're going to have a picture in there. You're going to have maybe an animation. You're going to have basic stuff. And I think starting there would be my recommendation. It's not the same for everybody. You might have just gotten a massive funding round and your investors are expecting you to plow that into a campaign to drive demand for your business. Of course, that's what you should go do because that's the promise that you've made and you're going to need to show return on investment. But if you are still self-funding your business, spending a bit of time with a photographer, with a videographer to say, look, I'm going to need a how-to video because I have created this lemon product and I need to show people how to cut the lemon and then squeeze it. Well, you're going to go out and do that. And if you're spending a day with a videographer, photographer in a room somewhere, ask them to also take a number of pictures that you can use in your emails. And it is very, there's a very low barrier to content creation. Again, the internet has really democratized that. You can get great content, but you do need somebody within your business that starts to specialize around that so you can turn it.
Wonderful. So now with this easy access to digital, so to speak, of course, everyone kind of jumps in there quickly. But then how do you right size? How do you sort of assess the return on investment? Or what kind of KPIs should you be looking at to really be able to ascertain, other than my mother loved the campaign, or my family shared it like 50 times. But what are some of the key KPIs that as a startup you should be looking at when you're marketing?
That's a great question. I hate to be vague, but it sort of depends on your business and your product. I'll try to make it very relevant to some specific examples. as a startup, you're going to need to show growth quickly, and you're going to need to, if you really are in a startup phase, you're going to need to show proof of concept very quickly. So I think having a number of KPIs that are very business, conversion driven makes sense in that startup phase. You are not in a phase that you can afford to invest in general awareness that doesn't convert, because generally the reason that large brands do that is because they have an understanding those folks may consider and then convert 6 to 12 months down the road. You probably don't have that time. So I think having KPIs that are very bottom of the funnel focus makes sense in the beginning of a startup evolution. And then whether that is sales targets, whether that is qualified leads, whether that is if you are a digital company specifically tracking the amount of visits to the website and conversions and clicks and other things, I think that makes a lot of sense. So more, I think in the earlier phases of a business focusing fully down funnel, makes a lot of sense.
I love the fact that you used the word proof of concept, because I think that's also a bit of a eureka moment for me when you say that, because I think before, say, selling your product to consumers, you may be needing to sell it to the investors, or you may be needing to sell it to a specific influence group. So you kind of have to be very clear about what is it that you want your marketing to do in that particular phase. So maybe you just need the number of downloads to be able to show an investor that it is kind of easy to pick up.
Yeah, sometimes it's even a concept within the marketing itself. Right? Can I show investors that I have a group of people that are going to be competent at doing this? Let me make a point back to the previous point. We actually, once Uber started doing marketing, there was a lot of focus on the bottom of the funnel. So it's really like, how much money can we invest in, and how can we track specific people taking their first trip or downloading the app? There's risk in that. The risk in that is if you over-optimize on any KPI, there are side effects. And I think as business founders, if there are any in the room, be aware of this and ask this question to your marketers. What is the risk of that focus? Then still focus on it to balance it. I'll give you our example. When we started focusing on the bottom of the funnel as a marketing KPI intensively, and I'm not sure if you know this, but when we decide to do something, we kind of like really go do it. And so really focusing on, for example, downloads or first trips as a KPI, what happened is all of the assets were put into the world. So all the banners, all the social assets and everything else started to be built to optimize for that KPI. So what we saw was large buttons. What we saw was messages only referring to free trial, free trip, try now. And trust me, the creative was not telling you anything new. So what happened is we were investing quite a bit of money, and we were seeing the direct return on investment, but we were leaving no equity. We were not telling our audiences anything other than that individual call to action in that asset. And that resulted again into the place where we went and spent quite a bit of money, but we never got the brand back. So we're learning from that. There are ways to get the same performance, but to actually work harder to, at the same time, leave behind some impression.
So if a startup today was, say, to learn from Uber's journey, where, please correct me if I'm wrong, but there was obviously a rush towards kind of expanding the business and kind of retrospective sort of awareness that we need to build the brand accordingly. What should a startup not be doing today to just kind of, as they go along checking the boxes?
I would not feel too much pressure to invest in sort of massive media too quickly. I would really look for the sweet spot for my audience. I would not go broad before you win narrow. They sound like cliches, but they are important. If in that proof of concept phase, win with a core audience, turn those into ambassadors, and then see how it goes. Use them also to sell your product. That is marketing in a new way. If you win an audience and say, great, you've now come on board, my product is taking up, there's some social equity with you being a user of my platform, why don't you bring other people onto the platform and really understanding how societies that you operate in tick? I think that's important. Other things not to do, overpromise. Other things not to do is putting marketing on kind of an outbound line. Don't talk about it at all. I think it needs to be part of the conversation. But I would argue you can start talking about branding, you can then roll into marketing specifically. And I think if the organization understands that brand building is important, not just the tech that drives our product, but if even the people engineering the product today understand that they are building an impression, that product is going to deliver an experience that will drive an impression in people's head. And I think as a founder, if you have that mentality, you're in a pretty good place.
So often, that when there's lots and lots of specialized functions, whether it's legal or tech development, etc., one tends to look for outsourced sort of help outside of the, say, the core team. But with marketing, people often assume that it can be done internally. Do you think specialized resources or specialized understanding per se is required for marketing, especially in the digital age when you can literally go and create a campaign online and really feel empowerment to yourself? So do you think that startups today need to be thinking in terms of getting specialized resources in marketing, or is it just brand awareness that could possibly drive them to create the right kind of campaigns?
That's a great question. It goes into organizational design, it goes into investment within the company. So to answer that question, yes, you need specialized resources. Marketers are experts. Not only have they been trained to look at audiences and drive insights, but they do usually have a functional expertise as well once you get into it, whether that is creating a CRM campaign and optimizing against your managing a performance marketing funnel, or creating assets, actually doing the creative work. Whether or not you insource or outsource that, I do not think that there is a red line. And I've seen organizations do both across all disciplines. All of those options come with pros and cons. We as a business are in the luxury position that we can attract unbelievably good talent. And so on the things that we think are important for us in the longer term, we insource because I have access to great talent. Many of my previous clients, when I was agency side, their brand didn't allow them to recruit that type of talent in certain disciplines, so they outsourced. Creative is a great idea. Or is a great example. So we have a brilliant in-house creative team. Creatives usually don't want to go in-house. They want to work for shit-hot agencies, and they want to have a roster of clients that they've worked with for those agencies. But because of the power of our brand and standing today, we're actually able to attract that talent in-house. That's very different. If I'm Philips, I'm probably not able to attract that talent, and so I will work with a great agency that is able to attract that talent. So it's much more of an employer branding question than it is a structure.